Hello there, and welcome to Dreamy Science. I'm so glad you're here. Maybe your day still echoes in your mind, the sharp edges of light, the hum of decisions, the weight of time, but now, gently, you are stepping into a colder, quieter world. Tonight, we drift into the long hush of the Ice Age. Not a single moment, but a slow unfolding. A time when mammoths roamed, when glaciers breathed across continents, when life curled into silence and waited. We'll glide through frozen valleys, beneath auroras that shimmered over silent snow, and into the deep time of Earth's forgotten winters. There's nothing you need to do, just breathe, just rest, and if these calm journeys help you soften, consider liking and subscribing to the channel. It helps more quiet minds find their way here, one sleepy soul at a time. The earth tilted slightly and everything changed. Seasons stretched into eras. The balance of warmth and cold shifted almost imperceptibly, yet its effects rippled across every continent. What had been brief winters stretched longer, deeper, wrapping the land in silence. Trees dropped their leaves earlier, then ceased returning them altogether. Snow became not just a visitor, but a resident. Year by year, decade by decade, the slow cascade of time changed the sky shade, the soil, the rhythm of breath. Life adjusted, not in sudden leaps, but in small generational whispers. The sun's arc grew lower, its path lazier. Shadows lengthened across the land, and so the earth, quiet and slow, entered a new chapter, one written in frost, in migration, in ice that remembered how to stay. Glaciers left behind great scars, but also valleys, lakes, and quiet places for life to grow. As they pressed their weight across the land, they carved deep furrows, split mountains, and carried stone like memory. But in their wake came hollows where water could gather, basins that caught light like cupped hands. The ridges they formed became spines of future forests. The boulders they dropped became altars for moss. And as the ice retreated, it left behind not ruin, but potential. A blank canvas smoothed by time, softened by pressure. What seemed at first like damage was actually invitation, space made for rivers to sing, for deer to roam, for roots to find their hold once more. Even destruction, it seems, can be gentle when stretched across millennia. Some animals adapted, some disappeared. Both changes were quiet. There were no grand announcements, only small shifts, a thicker coat here, a slower heartbeat there. Some creatures burrowed deeper, others grew smaller or larger, or simply wandered elsewhere, and a few, unable to find a rhythm in the cold, faded like breath on glass. Their absence was not marked with ceremony, but the silence they left behind shaped the landscape as surely as the glaciers did. Those that remained did so, not out of strength, but out of patience. They bent, flexed, endured. In the hush of falling snow, evolution whispered, not shouted. And across that frozen canvas, life continued, altered, quieted, but not erased. There were fires beneath the ice. Volcanoes whispered in the cold, while the surface slept in frost. Deep below, heat flowed in secret. Molten stone moved with ancient rhythm, pressing gently against the underside of glaciers. Occasionally, it reached higher, melting tunnels, releasing steam, shaping the land invisibly. Black rock appeared in white landscapes. Warmth nestled inside the vast cold. The earth was never truly still, only covered. Beneath its icy veil, it continued to breathe, to shift, to glow. Even in the silence of the Ice Age, there were sparks of transformation rising from below, proof that not all warmth needs to be visible to endure. Beneath glaciers, the ground pulsed. Pressure built like a frozen breath held too long. Rocks shifted imperceptibly, straining beneath the colossal weight of time. Water seeped between cracks and froze, prying the stone wider each year. Entire landscapes sagged under the burden, their very shape altered by the slow insistence of ice. And yet, like a coiled spring, this pressure held potential. When the ice eventually retreated, the earth rebounded, not suddenly, but gradually, as if exhaling after eons of restraint. Valleys lifted, mountains flexed, the crust remembered its freedom, and in that quiet restoration, the earth taught us. Even under immense weight, the promise of release remains. Forests shrank into pockets, life folded inward like closing leaves. Trees once spread across vast distances, now clustered tightly in sheltered corners, clinging to warmth wherever they could find it. In canyons, beside thermal springs, on sun-facing slopes, life gathered in whispers. The canopy thinned, and silence grew. Animals followed, adjusting their migrations, nesting patterns, diets. What had once been endless woods became patchwork sanctuaries, each one a small miracle of survival. And though the forests were diminished, they were not gone. Within each grove, the memory of abundance waited. Roots held stories. Seeds remembered old seasons, and when the cold lifted, these pockets would once again stretch outward, reclaiming what was only borrowed by ice. Mammoths walked beneath pale skies, their footsteps softened into snow. Each stride was steady, deliberate, worn into the rhythm of wind and ice. Their fur swayed like grass in a silent breeze, thick with the knowledge of cold. They traveled in herds, quiet as shadows, leaving trails that stitched stories across tundra. Their tusks curled like ancient riverbeds, tools for digging, weapons for protection, symbols of time's slow artistry. In their eyes, a stillness not of ignorance, but of deep endurance. They were not in a hurry. Time moved differently for them, measured not in hours, but in migrations. And when they slept, the snow gathered gently over them, as if even the weather showed respect. The sky glowed green and violet. Aurora danced over sleeping tundra. Curtains of light unfolded in slow, undulating waves, painting the night with silent movement. Stars blinked behind them, softened by shimmer. Below, the world lay hushed, frozen rivers, quiet trees, the breath of resting herds rising like mist. No sound disturbed the glow. It was a celestial lullaby, sung not with notes, but with presence. Even the wind paused. For ancient peoples and wandering animals alike, the lights were both comfort and mystery, a reminder that even in the coldest dark, beauty blooms, that above the frozen stillness, the sky still remembers how to move. Ice sheets sighed as they crept, slow motion rivers of silence. They flowed not with water, but with pressure, reshaping the land without ever rushing. Valleys deepened, mountains were smoothed. Every inch forward took centuries, and yet nothing could stand in their path. At their edges, they cracked and calved, releasing echoes that bounced across frozen plains. But within, they moved with unshakable calm. A glacier does not rush. It knows its destination is not a place, but a transformation, and as it moves, it carries history and grains of sand, ancient air, frozen pollen, holding the past inside its cold embrace. When it melts, it will speak again. Wolves learned to follow. Their paws left fleeting poems behind. In the snow, their tracks wove delicate threads behind herds of reindeer, mammoths, and bison. Eyes sharp, Ears attuned to the softest rustle, they moved with grace, not savagery. In silence, they observed. In patience, they thrived. Around firelit caves, some drew closer, curious, watchful. Bonds formed, tentative, then lasting. Companionships emerged between species, shaped by shared survival. The wolf became more than a predator. It became a sentinel, a friend, and through countless nights beneath silver moons, their presence was felt, not as threat, but as rhythm. A steady heartbeat beside the heartbeat of humans. Permafrost held ancient seeds. Time waited patiently underground, trapped in layers of frozen soil. Those seeds nestled in silence, untouched by sunlight, for thousands of years. Yet they did not decay. They did not forget. Instead, they remained intact, tiny scrolls of life wrapped tightly in memory. Some held the blueprints for flowers that once bloomed beside mammoths. Others contained grasses that waved in winds long since stilled. In recent times, when thawed gently and given light, a few of them woke, sprouted, bloomed, as if to say, even time cannot erase possibility. The earth had stored these fragments, not out of need, but out of love. And now, they whisper again. The sea withdrew in long exhales. Shorelines shifted like memories. The oceans, drawn back into themselves, left behind vast plains where waves once rolled. Dry sand shimmered under a pale sky. Creatures adapted to this new land, following retreating tides, nesting where coral once bloomed. Rivers carved fresh paths into this expanded world, and winds traced dunes across the newly revealed earth. The salty breath of the sea lingered in the air, even as its body receded further. Cliffs that once faced crashing surf now gazed out over quiet emptiness. It was not abandonment, but a rebalancing, a rhythm of inhale and exhale that played out over millennia. And beneath the silence, the tide still remembered its way home. Humans huddled in caves. Firelight flickered against stone. The warmth was sacred, casting shadows that danced across the walls like old memories. Hands reached toward embers with reverence. Outside, the cold howled, but inside, the breath of survival was steady. Meals were shared slowly, stories etched in charcoal and ochre on the walls. Not for decoration, but remembrance. Each cave was a heartbeat, a shelter of thought and bone. And as children drifted to sleep beside crackling flames, the deep hush of the Ice Age wrapped around them like another blanket. The cave was not just stone. It was home, hearth, history. The stars stayed constant overhead, a map through frozen night. When everything else changed, the animals, the weather, the shape of the land, the stars remained. They shimmered above snow-covered plains, guiding footsteps, migrations, dreams. Constellations whispered of directions and seasons. Polaris, steady and bright, anchored the wandering gaze. To lie beneath those stars was to remember that you were not lost, only small. And in that smallness, there was comfort. The sky turned slowly, predictably, with grace. Even when the world below was caught in ice, the stars stayed warm in their rhythm, silent companions, infinite and unchanged. Wind carved quiet sculptures. Snowflakes gathered in still spirals. Across ridges and into valleys, the wind whispered with slow intent, shaping drifts into soft waves and ridgelines, into frozen crests. The snow responded gently, settling into curves that echoed the hush of time. Ice feathered over branches, and rock building quiet monuments that would vanish by spring or remain for years. Nothing rushed, nothing shouted. The world was being sculpted by air, by frost, by repetition. And when sunlight touched these shapes, they glowed like glass, silent art formed by patience alone. Mountains wore crowns of ice, their shadows stretched across centuries. Peaks that once rose in bare defiance now bent beneath thick glaciers, their summits wrapped in frozen light. The wind sang around them, low and slow, as if in prayer. Snow clung to cliffs in soft layers, blanketing jagged stone with silence. From a distance, they looked eternal. But even these giants changed, slowly eroded by time and temperature. The ice crowned them, not as kings, but as elders, witnesses. Their stillness was not absence, but deep listening. And beneath them, valleys waited, carved drop by the weight of history. The woolly rhinoceros lumbered through frost, its horn like a brushstroke in time. Each step pressed into snow with deliberate weight. Its thick fur collected the breath of the wind. It did not roam in herds, but wandered, solitary and slow, a quiet force among low hills and silent streams. Where it walked, the landscape parted, grass frozen into stillness, shrubs dusted with frost. It moved without urgency, without sound, like a shadow etched in ice. In its horn was the memory of centuries, a line drawn again and again through winter. And when it disappeared, it left behind only the paths it shaped, silent, soft, enduring. Ice caught the sun and scattered it. Cold light wrapped the world. Reflections shimmered on every surface, branches, rocks, even the air itself. Crystals clung to the tiniest leaves, magnifying morning into brilliance. It was not warmth the light brought, but clarity, a stillness so bright it felt like breath, holding itself. The sun rose slowly, casting long golden shadows over pale landscapes. The sky was washed in pinks and soft blues, hues that barely existed in other seasons. And for a moment each day, the entire world seemed to pause, glazed in light, untouched by sound, waiting for nothing. Rivers froze and thawed with rhythm. A heartbeat slowed by winter. Ice thickened over currents that once rushed with certainty. Beneath the surface, water still moved, a ghost of its former speed, winding around pebbles, whispering against stone. In spring, cracks spidered outward, and meltwater sang its return. But for long stretches, the rivers were quiet, draped in a thin skin of stillness. Snow piled on their backs. Animals crossed with caution. Trees leaned close, reflecting their bare limbs in frozen glass. The river's pulse never stopped. It only softened, sinking itself with the long breath of the Ice Age. Snow buried old paths, but some creatures remembered the way. Beneath the drifting silence, trails remained in memory alone, encoded in instinct, in scent, in the quiet rhythm of migration. Caribou stepped into white landscapes with confidence, their hooves pressing fresh tracks over routes walked for generations. Wolves followed in patient distance. Birds circled above, tracing airways known only to feather and wind. Even as snowfall erased every sign of passage, the knowledge endured, not written, but lived. And so the paths remained, invisible, yet still walked, like lullabies sung without words. Glacial lakes pulsed with ancient melt, blue mirrors beneath white cliffs. In the warmth of brief summers, the ice wept into hollows carved by centuries of pressure. These lakes, born from retreating giants, held a stillness that seemed eternal. Their surfaces were glass, their depths unreadable. In them, the sky repeated itself, the clouds passing twice, once above, once below. Stones tumbled from cliffs and slipped quietly into the cold, leaving only ripples. No fish stirred, only meltwater and time. Around the edges, moss crept in. Lichens etched their colors into rock, and, above, birds circled, not with urgency, but with rhythm. These lakes were not only water, they were memory pools, catching each thaw and holding it gently, like a breath returned to the earth. Mammoth bones lay undisturbed. Silence wrapped them gently. Long after the herds had vanished, their forms remained cradled in permafrost and shadow, ribs like arches, tusks like moonlit arcs. The snow drifted over them with reverence, year after year, smoothing their edges, covering them with hush. There was no collapse, only settling, the way a story ends with a whisper. Animals passed nearby, but did not touch. The bones were not forgotten, but absorbed into the landscape, becoming part of the tundra's quiet shape. Even the wind moved around them with care, and beneath layers of ice and centuries, they waited, not for discovery, but simply to be, resting in a world that remembers without words. The ground cracked with each season. Patterns formed like slow music. As temperatures dipped and rose, the soil responded in rhythm, opening slightly, then sealing again. These weren't violent ruptures, but gentle rearrangements, the earth breathing through frost and thaw. Lines stretched across tundra in quiet harmony, fracturing the surface like veins or like notes pressed into frozen skin. Water trickled into the cracks, froze, and expanded, deepening the marks. Over time, these fissures became a language, the land's quiet song sung in breaks and seams. Some cracks echoed ancient roots, others followed paths of hidden streams, and above them, snow settled evenly, as if trying to mend the spaces in between. But the ground remembered season after season, whispering its melody into the structure of stone. Trees bent beneath the weight. Time pressed gently downward. Snow gathered slowly, flake by flake, until each branch bowed in silent acceptance. Trunks groaned but did not break. Leaves were long gone, replaced by a soft, white blanket that softened every outline. Even the evergreens, tall, resilient, seemed to exhale beneath their burden. In the hush of winter, these trees became sculptures of patience. Birds nestled in their crooks, squirrels burrowed at their bases. The forest stood not in defiance, but in grace. And as the sun rose in low arcs and cast golden blush across the snow-laden limbs, the trees glistened, not as symbols of survival, but as emblems of surrender. Endurance, it seemed, was not about standing tall, but about bending quietly with the season. Herds moved like drifting clouds, hooves softened by moss and snow. Across the vast tundra, the animals flowed as one, a gentle tide of fur and breath and rhythm. They traveled not in haste, but with memory. Their path was carved not into the land, but into the blood of each new generation. Where to step, when to pause, how to listen to the wind. Caribou, bison, mammoths, all part of the same slow current. When they rested, their breath steamed into the still air like incense. When they rose, it was as if the horizon itself had shifted. Behind them, tracks disappeared under fresh snow, erased with tenderness. Ahead, nothing was certain but motion, a dream slowly walking across the white. The ice age knew no hurry. It unfolded like a breath drawn deep. Millennia pass in slow-motion scenes. Glaciers crept, forests withdrew, oceans shifted with a sleepy grace. Nothing rushed, nothing demanded. Cold wrapped the world with care, tucking valleys beneath blankets of snow and silencing rivers until they hummed beneath the ice. Creatures adapted, not through force, but through stillness. Change arrived like fog, soft-edged and steady. Time thickened, moved differently, stretched like dusk at the poles. Even the stars, unchanged, seemed to flicker slower in the frost-laced sky. The Ice Age was not a moment, but a mood, a long, deliberate exhale of the planet. And in its vast patience, life unfolded like a slow bloom beneath the snow. Snow covered fossils and dreams, layers of time, one atop the other, bone and seed, shell and story, all tucked beneath blankets of white, hidden but never lost. Each snowfall sealed a page of Earth's quiet diary, pressing weight upon a memory with gentle hands. Over centuries, these layers built upon each other, not to bury, but to preserve. Creatures once alive became shapes in stone. Footprints became imprints of longing. Even the spaces between bones held breath, of movement, of sound, of endings. Fossils formed not as ruins, but as lullabies in stone, waiting to be read by sunlight or scientist. The snow did not forget. It only held, softly, until the world was ready to remember. The cold reached even the oceans. Currents shifted like sleep, turning over. Deep below the surface, the great circulations that warmed and cooled the globe adjusted their tempo. Ice formed at the poles and spread like a pause across the water. Plankton bloomed, then waned. Whales sang slower songs. Fish migrated in different arcs, sensing the shift long before it could be measured. Along the coasts, tides hesitated, as if unsure of the moon's pull. And beneath it all, the deep currents, those vast rivers of moving salt, whispered in new directions. The ocean, like the land, adapted to cold not in chaos, but in sway. And somewhere in the depths, warmth still drifted, not extinguished, only lulled into gentler movement. Sunlight broke through frozen haze, soft gold on endless white. For a brief moment each day, the world shimmered, trees glistened, snowfields sparkled like quiet galaxies spread across the ground. Shadows grew long and elegant, brushing the land with lavender and silver. The warmth was not strong, but it was enough to stir breath, to awaken a sparkle in the frost. Sunlight kissed icicles and made them sing with light. Hills blushed under the soft focus of winter's lens. It was a light not meant to heat, but to soothe, to remind. Even in the deepest cold, the sun had not forgotten. It still reached out, gently, to trace the outlines of stillness. Caves held stories in charcoal. Hands traced mammoths and stars. Flickers of firelight danced across the stone, illuminating the past, drawn in lines of soot and ochre. These were not decorations. They were echoes, preserved not in words but in shape. A spiral meant a journey. A handprint meant I was here. The cave was quiet, but the walls were alive with meaning. Families passed the stories down, by gesture, by rhythm, by firelight. The drawings became touchstones, constellations of memory mapped underground. Outside, the wind howled and snow pressed against stone, but inside, warmth and wonder held steady. The cave was a canvas, a cradle, a place where the Ice Age paused and let humans speak. Echoes lingered in empty valleys. Sounds wrapped in stillness, the calls of birds, the howl of distant wolves, the soft groan of shifting ice. All of them arrived, then vanished into the wide hush. In these valleys, the wind carried memory. It moved through hollows and over ridges, tracing the curves of the land like breath across sleeping skin. Nothing was loud here, but nothing was truly silent either. The quiet held texture, layers of forgotten sound folded into snow, a falling branch, a cracking stone, the low murmur of water still moving beneath frozen layers. To stand in such a place was to be wrapped in time, as if the earth itself were exhaling, slowly, without end. Mammoths grew thick coats. The wind respected their weight. Their fur was dense as moss, layered in warmth spun by evolution and patience. Each strand held the memory of ice. They stood broad and calm beneath snowfall, unmoved by the bite of the air. Their breath steamed outward in clouds, then vanished. Their eyes were slow blinks of dark, their pace a rhythm carved from centuries. Snow gathered on their backs, unshaken. Herds moved as one, not in panic, but in slow procession, like the passing of shadow. Even the predators watched with reverence. These giants were not merely survivors of the Ice Age. They were part of its breath, its silence, its weight. The earth pulsed under glaciers, alive but slow. Beneath miles of ice, warmth stirred, rocks cracked, water seeped through pressure-formed channels. Volcanoes dozed, not dead, but dreaming. The immense weight above pressed downward, shaping the planet with a hand of silence. Yet even in stillness, energy coiled. Heat escaped in thin veins. Minerals moved. The crust shifted, barely perceptible on the surface, but building toward change. Glaciers were not passive blankets. They were sculptors, their chill carved valleys, their meltwater carved veins, and far below, the earth responded in rhythm. It heaved in slow motion, a heartbeat slowed by ice, but steady all the same. Humans watched the sky for signs. Even in silence, they looked up. The stars were more than decoration. They were companions, patterns that stayed steady while the world below changed. The moon grew bright against the snow, casting long shadows that swayed like ghosts. Comets arrived, brief and brilliant, and elders whispered their meanings by firelight. Sun halos glowed in the cold air, arcs of light that felt like messages. Each change in the heavens was a ripple felt across the soul. Even without clocks, time moved through the sky, and so they watched, not to control, but to remember, not to understand, but to wonder. Ice cracked with a sound like thunder, then returned to silence. A single rupture echoed across the tundra, bouncing off hills, startling birds into flight. Then nothing. The world returned to breath, as if it hadn't happened. But deep beneath the snow, a fault had shifted. The glacier had spoken. These moments were rare but remembered, a reminder that even the stillest landscapes are not truly still. The pressure of time, of cold, of silence, sometimes breaks its surface, and in that brief shudder, the earth breathes out. Then again, the hush returns, deeper, softer, more sacred than before. Life grew, small and careful. Each heartbeat counted. Mice tunneled through snow with barely a sound. Insects tucked into tree bark, their blood changed by antifreeze proteins. Birds shrank, bodies adapted. Survival was not about strength, but stillness, about wasting nothing. In hollows and under roots, breath slowed. Warmth gathered in nests made of fur and feather. Even plants retreated into seeds waiting. Time stretched between meals. The sun moved low on the horizon, offering little heat but enough light to remember color. This was not despair, it was discipline. 1,000 tiny lives, each a quiet thread in the tapestry of cold, continuing because they knew how to stop. Fungi bloomed beneath snow, a quiet feast for tiny lives. In the dark damp just under the frozen surface, mycelium reached out in slow networks, threading through soil, bark, and fallen wood. These invisible forests fed on decay and offered nourishment in return. Insects, microbes, and roots all shared in the gift. Even under the grip of frost, there was exchange, a symphony of quiet giving. Fungi remember warmth and moisture, and found ways to hold on to both. Spore by spore, they waited, And when a thaw came, however slight, they opened, unfurled, and connected. Beneath snow's silence, life continued, hidden, humming, and wise. Ancient rivers wandered, then froze, meandering through memory. They curved across plains that no longer exist, tracing paths between glacial walls and open skies. In summer, they flowed with meltwater, swift, silver ribbons of motion. In winter, they slowed, then stopped, their surface hardening, but never fully still inside. Fish drifted beneath the ice. Sediment settled like sleep. The rivers forgot nothing. They carried the minerals of mountains, the remains of forests, the breath of distant lakes. Even in silence, they pulled the land into shape, and when the thaw returned, they moved again, as if they had only paused for breath. The air held no urgency, only breath, misted and slow. Each inhalation cooled the lungs. Each exhale curled into the sky like soft smoke. Animals moved without haste. Humans spoke in low tones or not at all. The cold taught everyone to be careful. With movement, with warmth, with energy. Frost gathered on eyelashes. Sound fell away. Stillness became the rhythm of life. And within that stillness, everything mattered. A step, a fire, a single bite of food. The Ice Age was not loud. It was a world pared down to essentials, to breath, to presence, to the beauty of simply being. Feathers thickened, wings grew still, birds waited in dreams, migration halted, and instinct folded inward. In nests tucked into hollows, warmth held fast. The air outside was too sharp, too thin, and so they stayed, not out of fear, but out of knowing. To pause is also to survive. Down feathers grew dense. Eyes closed often. Metabolism slowed. In the frozen silence, birds existed not in song, but in memory. Somewhere in their dreaming minds, the winds still moved and the sun still warmed, but for now, they rested. And the sky, empty for a while, seemed to honor their absence with even greater stillness. Trees recorded the cold in rings, a silent diary of frost, each line pressed into wood, like a whisper of weather long past. Narrow rings marked hard years, when the sun offered little, and the frost lingered deep into spring. Wider rings spoke of brief reprieves, moments when warmth returned, just long enough for growth to sigh outward. These rings held no words, no ink, but they remembered. Each was a layer of survival, a note in the song of patience. Trees do not hurry. They hold time differently. They grow in cycles, not deadlines. And even after they fall, the pattern remains, a fossilized rhythm of sun and snow, hope and stillness. To read these rings is to touch time, to see how life can wait. Stones bore the polish of ice, smoothened by centuries of contact. Glaciers dragged them slowly, grinding away every sharpness, every edge. Under miles of pressure, rock met ice, and the dance began, not quick, not fiery, but slow and relentless. Over thousands of years, boulders became round, valleys deepened, cliffs grew soft. What had once been jagged now gleamed beneath the light, shaped by forces that never shouted, only pressed. These polished stones sat like memories across the land. Some rested in places far from where they began, carried by frozen rivers that no longer flowed. And in their silence, they remembered movement, remembered the cold hand that smoothed them into stillness. The mammoth's eye saw both snow and fire, past and present in its blink. It lived between seasons, between extinctions and arrivals. Snow clung to its fur, but ash once dusted its path. It walked beneath auroras and over old lava. Its gaze held centuries. When it blinked, it remembered ancestors who had never seen trees. When it looked ahead, it saw the faint flicker of a warming world, Firelight reflected in its eye just as stars did. The mammoth didn't dwell on the past. It moved through it, step by heavy step. It carried time forward, brushing frost from memory. And even now, fossilized eyes sometimes surface, still glossy, still holding the shape of reflection, of light, of life paused. The auroras returned each night, like lullabies made of light. Ribbons of green and violet shimmered above the ice, dancing in silence. They curved and twisted, shaped by unseen winds high in the atmosphere. Below, animals paused. Even the restless grew still. The sky had become a river of motion, yet nothing rushed. It moved the way breath does in sleep, gently, rhythmically. Early humans watched from the mouths of caves. They did not name the auroras. They felt them, in their flicker, warmth, in their glow, wonder. The light wrapped around the stars like a soft veil, and for those who watched, night became a ceremony of color and quiet. Some stars seemed brighter then. The dark was deeper. No cities scattered their glow. No lamps competed with their cold fire. They pierced the sky with ancient certainty, steady as the heartbeat of the world. Even the smallest flicker could be seen, a galaxy, a planet, a faraway sun. People looked up and saw stories. They didn't need telescopes. Their memory was the lens. In the hush of frozen plains, stargazing became prayer, a practice not of seeking, but of seeing. The stars were not answers. They were companions, lights that asked nothing and gave only presence. They hung in the cold sky like quiet promises that the world kept turning. Volcanoes pulsed beneath ice sheets, warmth dreaming under cold. The contrast was quiet, fire wrapped in stillness, pressure building beneath silence. Beneath the vast glaciers, magma stirred, slow and patient. It did not explode, not yet. It waited, and as it waited, the ice above shaped the land. Valleys deepened, ridges rose, but below, something else gathered. The earth breathed inward. Over time, this tension would awaken, a crack, a sigh, a slow exhale of steam. Some of the oldest landscapes were forged by this gentle battle, cold above, fire below. And even in deep winter, the warmth never left. It simply curled inward, waiting for its moment. The wind sang a different song, one that curled around bones. It moved not in gusts, but in long, low hums, a breath over snowfields, across glacial cliffs, through sleeping pines. It carried no scent of flowers, only the taste of ice. Animals tilted their ears to it. It warned of storms, spoke of distance. Early humans heard its voice and learned to listen. The wind was not empty. It remembered. It echoed off stones smoothed by time. It whistled through the rib cages of fallen creatures. It rustled the furs of those who still moved. In its song, you could feel the age of the land, a lullaby, low and endless. Early humans followed reindeer paths, trusting the rhythm of migration. Step after step, season after season, they moved where hooves had gone. Snow packed beneath their feet. Above them, stars shifted slowly. Reindeer did not rush. They drifted, guided by ancient instinct, pausing at remembered places, and humans followed, not by conquering the land, but by listening to it. Tracks in mud, fur snagged on bark, a pause at the edge of a frozen lake. These were the signs. And so, they moved with the seasons, not against them, not settlers, but travelers, carried forward by trust, by need, by the old, unspoken knowledge of survival. Teeth marks on old bones, traces of hunger long since faded, tiny grooves in fossilized ivory, cracks left by cold jaws. These were not ruins of violence, but of need. In the leanest months, everything became food. Wolves gnawed, bears cracked, humans chipped marrow from the center. The bones tell the story, not of cruelty, but of endurance. Hunger left its signature quietly, and after the feast, snow returned, covered the evidence, preserved it. Thousands of years later, the marks remain, a kind of fossilized breath, each one a whisper from a winter long gone. Sunlight on snow, a moment of warmth, stretched thin, rays spilled over hills and caught on the edges of crystals. The world lit up in silence, no sound, only glow. Every flake became a prism. Shadows shrank, frost twinkled, and even the coldest creatures turned their faces toward the light. It did not last. The sun was low, brief, reluctant, but in that brief shimmer, the world softened. Snow released scent, ice released light, and hearts released a little hope, not for heat, but for holding on, for remembering that even in the deepest cold, the sun still returns. The sky stretched wider in the cold. Clouds moved like breath. Slow, low formations drifted across the pale horizon, tinged with lavender and soft grays. There was a hush in the air, as if the atmosphere itself had slowed to match the rhythm of ice. The vastness above felt even more endless, the curvature of the earth more apparent, the dome of stars nearer than before. Birds flew lower, hugging the treetops, conserving warmth. The light came in at shallow angles, never climbing high, painting everything with silver and blue. The sky did not rush to change. It turned gently from dawn to dusk, as though time had thickened, and beneath it, life moved at the pace of snowfall, of dreams. Even silence had a texture, soft, deep, weightless. It filled valleys and caves, pressed into the snow, wrapped itself around trees like a second skin. This silence was not empty. It was full of breath, of listening, of presence. It crept between paw prints, settled over bones, lingered after footsteps had passed. In this quiet, every sound became sacred. A bird's wing, the sigh of snow shifting, a distant crack of ice, and then stillness again, as if the world itself were resting, breathing in long, slow intervals. The Ice Age was not loud. It was a hush, a great pause, a tender lull in the music of time. Melting ice carved deep fjords, new paths formed in old stone. The thaw didn't rush. It wandered slow and heavy, like a memory returning. Water, freed from its crystalline stillness, began to move over cliffs, through cracks, into valleys long hidden. It etched the land in graceful lines, cutting canyons, shaping coastlines. These fjords became the resting place for sky and sea, reflecting clouds in still water. Sometimes, entire mountainsides crumbled under the touch of melt, and then quieted again. And through it all, the earth accepted each change without resistance. The marks were not wounds, they were stories. The way time speaks through stone, icebergs creaked as they drifted, sleeping giants on a slow journey. Born from the edge of glaciers, they cracked and fell with thunder. And then, silence. Their voyage was soundless, an unhurried glide across black water, each one a cathedral of frozen time, blue at the core, sculpted by wind and melt. Seals rested on their backs. Seabirds circled above. Beneath, whales passed in shadow. The icebergs did not steer themselves. They followed currents. And as they melted, they told stories of where they had come from, what skies they had seen, how cold the world had once been. Their journey was not to arrive, but to become part of the ocean. A child once pressed a hand into clay, and the print remains. Fingers splayed, palms small, caught in a moment of softness before it hardened into stone. No name, no date, just the quiet presence of being. Perhaps the child laughed, or simply listened to the wind, not knowing the mark would last for thousands of years. Now, that handprint waits in the dark, in a cave where water still drips and moss clings to rock. It is not a message. It is a memory, proof that life was there, not shouting, but whispering. And in that whisper, we are connected, past to present, cold to warmth. Musk oxen face the wind, their breath steaming in stillness. They did not flee the storm. They lowered their heads, shoulder to shoulder, and stood. Their coats, thick with wool and guard hairs, held back the cold like ancient armor. Snow gathered on their backs, unmoving. Beneath them, hooves scraped for lichen, for anything green. They lived not by escaping winter, but by enduring it. Quiet strength, patience, stillness. In their eyes, the same resolve as mountains. The herd moved slowly, if at all, each step measured. And when the wind paused, they did not cheer. They simply waited, because they knew the storm always ends. Trees migrated slowly, following warmth like a whisper, not in a rush, not in steps, but in seeds. Blown by wind, dropped by birds, carried by water. One sprout grew where the snow melted earlier. Another took root just beyond the shadow line. And so, over centuries, the forest inched forward. Trees that once stood tall in cold valleys now found themselves too chilled to thrive, but their children reached for the sun, settling where the frost came a little later each year. The forest was not lost. It shifted, reformed, adapted, a creeping green tide, chasing warmth, leaf by patient leaf. Ash from distant eruptions dusted the snow, a veil over white. Tiny grains from mountains, hundreds of miles away, floated down in silence, soft as breath. The ash carried memory of fire, of molten earth, of sudden sky-darkening storms. And on the pale canvas of the Ice Age, it painted delicate gray patterns. Snowflakes caught the soot. Glaciers trapped it in layers. Each speck became a time marker, a story frozen in strata. Even now, scientists find it, a faint line in ice cores, a quiet fingerprint of faraway eruptions. The Earth speaks to itself across distances, one eruption, one snowfall at a time. The mammoth's tusk curled like time itself, a spiral of memory. Each groove a record of growth, of season, of hardship survived. The ivory held stories of drought and abundance, of long migrations and still winters. Inside, chemical traces, what it ate, where it drank, how far it wandered. Outside, the curve itself, elegant, deliberate, strong. Not just a weapon, but a journal. Even in death, the tusk remained. It rested in sediment, buried beneath moss and melt, holding the quiet history of a life well lived. And when uncovered, it revealed not tragedy, but endurance. The shape of time turned slowly in the cold. The cold sculpted everything, even dreams. It shaped the way creatures moved, the way they breathed, the way they hoped. Sleep came deeper, hearts beat slower. Fantasies were not of heat, but of shelter, of food, of spring. Children dreamed of light, of green, of birds returning. Even in sleep, the Ice Age left its mark in the softness of thought, in the simplicity of desire. The mind, like the land, adapted. It folded in, grew quieter. And when warmth returned slowly, so did dreams of blooming, of running, of sun. But for a time, even the imagination wore furs and walked gently through frost. Fires flickered in caves, orange light against the endless blue. The flames moved like stories, shifting shadows across stone walls, casting warmth into the hollows where silence waited. Outside, the cold pressed in, a vastness of snow and wind, but inside, the flicker was steady. The light pulsed on ancient hands, on sleeping children, on spears and stones and bowls carved from bone. Sparks rose to meet the dark, tiny stars beneath the earth. And in that circle of glow, people breathed together, slowly, softly. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The fire told its own tale, a lullaby of warmth, of survival, of stillness. A heartbeat of flame in the heart of the Ice Age. Saber-toothed cats prowled the edges of night, ghosts with golden eyes. They moved like shadows that had learned to breathe, their steps silent as falling snow. Muscles rippled beneath thick fur, and their teeth gleamed in moonlight like pale moons. They didn't rush, they waited, watching from ridges, from forests, from behind the curve of land. The world was quiet when they walked. Even the wind seemed to listen. Their presence held the hush of danger, yes, but also of awe. These were creatures that knew the cold not as an enemy, but as a mirror. Their eyes did not flinch from the frost. They looked through it as if it were merely another veil to pass through, another shadow to vanish into. Bones lay under glaciers, waiting, not buried in sorrow, but in stillness, held in place by time, by weight, by ice that moved so slowly it felt like forever. They were not forgotten. The earth remembered each rib, each tusk, each curve of skull, gently cradled in frozen silence. As glaciers crept over valleys and hills, they pressed down on these remains like careful hands, not to erase, but to preserve, to hold. The bones told stories no one could hear, of migrations, of winters survived, of final moments softened by snow. And one day, long after the ice melted, they would rise again, carried into light, still quiet, still listening. Sky and ground blurred in storms, only memory marked the trail. Snow swept across the land in waves, erasing footprints, paths, even shapes. The horizon vanished. There was no up or down, only motion, white, wind-driven, endless. Creatures huddled beneath trees or tucked into burrows. Humans waited in silence, remembering the feel of land beneath them, the shape of familiar roots, the warmth of fire waiting at the end. In these moments, the storm became the only world, a cocoon of cold, a veil over time. And when it passed, the land was not the same, but those who survived it knew it more deeply, as one knows the rhythm of a breath, held and finally released. A comet once passed, silently overhead. No one saw it, but it glowed. High above the sleeping earth, it streaked across the sky like a silent wish. Ice and dust trailed behind it, catching starlight and scattering it like whispers. Below, glaciers gleamed in faint reflection, unaware of the celestial visitor. No songs were sung for it, no stories remembered, but the moment was real, a brief connection between cosmos and cold, between the moving heavens and the frozen ground. The comet continued its journey, vanishing beyond view, carrying with it the quiet gaze of a planet wrapped in winter. Sometimes, even unnoticed beauty leaves a trace. Human footprints froze into stone, a soft rebellion against time, pressed into once wet mud, then sealed by layers of frost and ash. They remained, delicate, simple, enduring. The steps told no story of conquest or fame, only of presence. A person walked here, a child perhaps, chasing a shadow, a hunter returning to fire, a mother carrying warmth through the cold. And now those footprints remain, long after the body is gone, long after the breath has faded. Time tried to smooth them away, but the earth held on. And in holding on, it whispered, "You were here, you mattered, you left something behind." Nights lasted longer, even the moon slowed down, or so it seemed, as though time itself stretched to match the silence. Darkness lingered over the snow, a deep velvet sky scattered with stars that refused to fade. Fires flickered longer, stories took their time. The cold pressed in, but with it came stillness, a hush so complete it felt like floating. Animals moved less, dreams lasted more. The moon cast silver light across frozen fields, illuminating frost-covered trees like statues of sleep. The world turned slower, and no one hurried. Night had its own rhythm, and those who listened found peace in its long embrace. The earth breathed slower then, deep and cold. With every glacier that advanced, with every snowfall that blanketed the land, the planet seemed to settle into a deeper rhythm. Mountains held their breath beneath the weight of ice, rivers paused in their flow, forests quieted their leaves, and beneath the frost, life pulsed gently, seeds sleeping, creatures curled into nests, roots wrapped in soil like whispers. It was not a dead world. It was resting, like an exhale held just a little longer, a pause between songs, a winter of the soul. And though it moved slowly, it moved quietly, calmly, stars reflected in icy lakes, sky and earth touching. The surface held constellations like glass, unbroken and still. Each ripple of wind shimmered with galaxies. No sound, no movement, just the vast overhead echoed below. Animals came to drink, their presence soft, reverent. Sometimes, even breath felt too loud beside such stillness. In that mirrored world, the cosmos seemed closer, more intimate, as if the stars were peering down, and the earth was gently looking back. A conversation made not with words, but with presence, with being. For a few quiet moments, the divide between sky and land dissolved, and all was reflection. Seeds slept beneath frost, waiting for spring that never came. Their husks held tight, curled inward like dreams hidden beneath blankets. Cold seeped into every crevice, but the seeds endured. They had no clocks, no calendars, only instinct, a patience older than time. Snow fell, ice thickened, seasons shifted, like breath held and never released. Yet still, the seeds remained, silent, patient, rooted not in soil, but in hope. And though the warmth was slow to return, it was never forgotten. Deep within, the memory of green lingered, and so they waited and waited, because life, even buried in frost, remembers how to bloom. Fires flickered in caves, orange light against the endless blue. Inside the stone-walled hollows, warmth danced on rough surfaces, casting trembling shadows of hands and fur and hope. The air was thick with smoke and quiet stories, breath fogging in the cold as embers glowed like stars cradled on the floor. Outside, the world was wrapped in ice and silence, but within these caves, time bent gently around the hearth. The fire didn't speak loudly. It whispered, a crackle here, a pop there, a soft chorus of heat rising against stone. Humans sat close, their faces still, watching flame like a memory unfolding. It was enough. In that warmth, sleep could come. And for a moment, the cold stayed outside. Saber-toothed cats prowled the edges of night, ghosts with golden eyes. Their movements were silent, but certain, brushing through snow-dusted brush and shadow. Muscles rippled under heavy coats as they walked the border between sleep and survival, following paths only they could sense. The cold was not their enemy, but their mirror. They belonged to it, part of the world carved by frost and patience. From ridgelines and frozen gullies, they watched the flicker of distant firelight, the slow breath of mammoth herds, the stillness of prey curled in dream. Their paws left no mark in the soft powder, only a presence, a hush, like a forgotten lullaby. When they passed, the night seemed to settle behind them, the silence growing deeper in their wake. Bones lay under glaciers, waiting. Time flowed above them like slow rivers of ice, pressing down without malice, preserving without intent. These remains did not resist. They simply became part of the Earth's memory, a curve of rib, a tusk worn smooth, vertebrae cradled in the cold, untouched by light for thousands of years. They waited without longing. The world changed above them, seasons shifting, forests rising and falling, stars moving through the sky, but the bones remained, still, held, and deep in the quiet layers of time, the earth remembered. Someday a glacier might melt, a hillside shift, and the bones might rise again, brushing the air like old thoughts resurfacing. Until then, they waited, without sorrow, without sound. Sky and ground blurred in storms, only memory marked the trail. The wind howled low and endless, twisting snow into veils that erased everything but movement. Trees vanished into white, landmarks disappeared, even sound lost its shape in the blizzard's breath. Travelers hunched low, each step a guess, each breath a gift. Yet within the storm's chaos, a strange calm lived, a surrender, as if the world had returned to blankness, offering a moment to be nothing but motion in a dream. The storm did not rush. It pressed on slowly, endlessly, like sleep stretching across hours, and when it passed, the world was changed, softer, quieter, blanketed in hush. The only thing that remained was memory. A comet once passed silently overhead. No one saw it, but it glowed, a thread of silver sliding through the dark, unnoticed by those sleeping below. It moved slowly, deliberately, casting no shadow, offering no warning, and yet its path stitched something invisible between sky and earth. In that moment, the frozen world and the deep heavens shared a secret. The comet did not pause. It did not need to be seen to matter. Its presence was enough, a whisper in the vast dark, a brushstroke of motion across the canvas of time. Somewhere far below, a mammoth stirred in its sleep. Somewhere, a glacier cracked, unaware, and the comet moved on, leaving nothing but silence behind. Human footprints froze into stone, a soft rebellion against time. Pressed into once wet earth, then covered by ash, snow, and years, they held fast beneath layers of history. The feet that made them are long gone, but the impression remains, small, simple, perfect. A pause captured mid-step, a frozen breath of motion. The ground, like a quiet witness, remembered that moment and preserved it gently, not as a monument, but as a whisper. These prints speak of presence, of warmth once held in skin, of a life moving through a frozen world. They do not ask to be noticed. They are simply there, still, waiting for someone to feel their quiet truth. Nights lasted longer, even the moon slowed down, or perhaps it only seemed that way. Time stretched like a soft sigh across a frozen sky. Shadows grew deeper, stretching over snow like long thoughts. Fires burned low and steady, their light swallowed by the endless dark. Underneath that quiet weight of night, everything moved more slowly. Breaths, footsteps, dreams. The stars were sharper, more insistent, as if closer to the earth. The world whispered through frostbitten branches and ice-glazed stones, each moment unfolding without urgency. The long night was not frightening. It was sacred, a place of pause, a space to rest within, like sleep inside sleep. The earth breathed slower then, deep and cold, Beneath the shifting glaciers and the drifting snow, the land exhaled in centuries, inhaled in epochs. Mountains rose slowly, their bones chilled by time. Valleys carved by melting ice seemed to wait between movements. Rivers stilled into silence, their waters dreaming beneath layers of frost. Trees stood quiet, leaves held in memory. Even the creatures slowed their rhythm, hearts beating in measured, careful time. This breath of the planet wasn't gone, it was simply deeper, more hidden, like a song hummed beneath the surface of thought. The earth was resting, not sleeping, healing, not halting, alive, but in hush. Stars reflected in icy lakes, sky and earth touching. The frozen surface mirrored the heavens with a clarity that felt like prayer. Constellations shimmered beside sleeping trees, and the moon rippled gently in a basin of frost. Stillness reigned, not from emptiness, but from completion. Nothing needed to move, nothing needed to change. In this moment, the boundary between above and below dissolved, as if the cosmos had leaned in to listen to the snow. Animals approached slowly, their reflections gliding beside them. They drank not just water, but starlight, and for a breath, the world was doubled, one above, one below, both watching, both waiting. Seeds slept beneath frost, waiting for spring that never came. Curled in darkness, wrapped in still soil, they held a memory of warmth inside them. No movement, no urgency, just the slow burn of potential. Snow pressed down, ice crept in, seasons circled without end, but the seeds did not surrender. They waited without asking, dreamed without stirring, and within their silence, something sacred remained, a promise made not with sound but with stillness. Even if the warmth never returned, the dream of green would remain, hidden, gentle, unbroken, because sometimes to be alive means only to endure, and to endure is its own kind of blooming. Snow whispered against stone, a conversation in hushes. The flakes didn't fall, they floated, each one a breath of cold silence, finding rest on ancient cliffs. Against the rough texture of rock, snow settled like soft punctuation in a story too quiet for words. Wind carried its voice in threads, winding between ledges and cracks, wrapping each boulder in frost. There was no urgency, no rush to cover or claim, just presence, just stillness. In these frozen exchanges, the world spoke to itself in tones only time could hear, and the rocks, old and patient, answered not with movement, but with memory. Northern lights blinked in rhythm, like breath. Green veils pulsed across the sky, folding and unfolding with a gentleness that felt alive. They swayed above the snow-covered land, like the sky was breathing out its dreams, each flicker a soft exhale, each ripple a heartbeat in color. Beneath that glowing canopy, everything stilled, trees, rivers, sleeping creatures. All eyes looked up, even the unseen ones. The aurora did not need to explain itself. Its rhythm was enough, a celestial lullaby, a hush painted in motion. Every footprint melted, but not without leaving a trace, the weight of a body, the warmth of a moment. Each step pressed meaning into the snow, however briefly. Then came the sun, or the wind, or the next flurry of silence, and the shape dissolved. But something lingered, not the shape, but the presence, a knowing, as if the earth itself had noticed, had welcomed the visitor, and folded the memory inward like a note tucked beneath ice. Nothing lasts, but nothing is ever entirely gone. Glaciers moved like time, steady, unseen, certain. They crept over continents in a hush, reshaping the world not with force, but with patience. Valleys deepened, mountains softened, Rivers were born under the press of ancient cold, and the glacier, indifferent to haste, continued forward, day by day, century by century. It did not rush, and so it endured. Like time, it asked nothing, demanded nothing, only continued. It carried stones like thoughts, smoothed them like old memories, and left them gently across the land, as if scattering a story too long to speak aloud. The world was wide and white and full of waiting. Everything stretched into quiet, skies, rivers, forests, plains, each wrapped in the stillness of a paused breath. The snow didn't silence the world, it slowed it until every sound became soft, until even thoughts moved gently through the cold. Waiting wasn't emptiness, it was presence, it was readiness without pressure. Trees waited, seeds waited, light waited, just beneath the horizon. The entire world poised and peaceful, trusting the cycle, trusting return. And in that stillness, something sacred stirred. Firelight shimmered on icy walls, a dance in amber glow. The light flickered over carvings and shadows, tracing stories with warmth and motion. In its glow, the cave felt alive, each crack and crevice catching gold for a moment, then letting it go. The fire didn't fight the dark, it joined it gently. It painted a soft heartbeat on the frozen stone, a reminder that warmth existed even here, and those who gathered around it, wrapped in furs, curled into sleep, carried the flame within them, even as the world outside turned to frost. The aurora shifted again, painting stories on the sky. Threads of light wove across the heavens, telling tales no voice could hold. They moved in curves, in whispers of green and violet and rose, folding and unfolding like the turning of pages. Each wave spoke of something ancient, of magnetism and solar breath, of particles and silence. And yet, the story felt close, personal, like a lullaby heard in sleep. Below, snow shimmered in the same rhythm, reflecting the tales above, and the world listened. Bones were carved into flutes, music from memory, hollowed carefully, lovingly, by hands that understood breath and silence. Each note drawn from those flutes carried more than sound. It carried time, a vibration from the past, echoing in frozen air. The melodies were simple, slow, like the call of wind through trees, like the hush of snow falling on skin. They were played in darkness, by firelight, or under stars, not for crowds, but for closeness, for connection. The past did not speak in words, it sang. Shadows stretched long in the low sun, a painting in motion. Winter's light skimmed the horizon, casting each branch, each rock, each step into tall quiet. The landscape became a canvas of dusk and detail, where every angle was soft, every edge smudged by light. These shadows didn't hurry. They moved like thoughts passing behind closed eyes, drifting, lingering, fading slowly into the next. Even the creatures moved with the light, not against it, as if all of life was choreographed to the sun's slow turning. And in this motion, nothing felt lost, only translated. The earth held its breath, ice pressed down, silence grew. In that deep pause, everything waited, not in fear, but in reverence. Pressure built, but so did stillness. Beneath the weight of glacial miles, stones whispered, water dreamed, and warmth moved like a forgotten promise. Life didn't vanish. It tucked itself away. In roots, in seeds, in dreams. And the earth, vast and knowing, did not rush. It simply held space. A pause so full it became sacred. And in that breath, the future gathered strength. A single bird flew over the snow, feathered grace above frozen time. Its wings beat slowly, gently slicing the cold air, not to escape, but to move within it. Below, the landscape was quiet, brushed smooth by snowfall and stillness. The bird, light as breath, cast a soft shadow on the white below. It did not call out. There was no need. Its presence alone was song enough, a quiet defiance, a moment of life in the hush. Somewhere it would land, somewhere it would rest, but for now, it glided across the open air, a heartbeat of motion in a sleeping world. The glaciers melted slowly, as if reluctant to let go. Water trickled from beneath them in quiet rivulets, not rushing, just emerging, drop by drop, like memories warming in the mind. The ice, which had held time and stillness for thousands of years, softened at the edges, shapes blurred, edges wept. But even in melting, there was grace. Glaciers did not shatter, they released. They passed their stories into streams and lakes, into fertile ground and shimmering mist, and as they thinned, they didn't vanish. They became something new, something flowing, returning, remembering. Grass returned inch by inch, the green whispering back like soft laughter after long silence. The first blades pushed gently through thawed soil. There was no fanfare, only patience. Roots stretched downward, cautious and slow, while tender shoots reached for light that had waited too. This was not a return of what once was, but a reimagining. The landscape didn't resume, it began again. Each patch of grass a poem, each sprout a soft answer to the long, cold question. Life, after all, is a rhythm, and green was its next note. Rivers began to sing again, water over stone. The frozen silence cracked open into melody, gentle and persistent, winding its way through valleys that had only recently remembered the sun. The song was not loud. It didn't rush. It trickled, then rippled, then swirled in eddies as if testing its own voice. Stones that had waited in hush for centuries now danced beneath the flow, turning, smoothing, remembering movement. The river didn't ask where it was going. It simply went. It sang not to be heard, but because it could. Mammoths vanished like dreams. Their echoes stayed. Long after the herds no longer walked the snowy plains, their presence lingered, curved tusks left beneath the soil, footprints fossilized in ancient mud, strands of hair caught in the roots of thawed earth. You could almost hear them still, the soft rumble of weight, the gentle hush of breath in the cold, but they were gone, like a story that ends not with a full stop, but with a long, soft pause. Their time passed, but their memory remained, quiet as a sigh. Trees stretched upward again, their roots remembered. Beneath the surface, in dark, damp soil, they had waited, coiled, silent, still. And now, in the warmth returning like a distant song, they reached. Slowly, without hurry, they grew. Each ring in their trunk would record this beginning. Each leaf would whisper stories to the wind. The trees did not rise in triumph. They rose in rhythm, called not by will but by time. What had once retreated now returned, not as it was, but wiser and taller. The ice retreated, but it left behind its memory carved into stone, etched into valleys, hidden in the shapes of lakes and hills. The world did not forget. The land wore its past like a soft cloak, every ridge and groove a reminder of what had once held it still. But even as the cold released its grip, its imprint remained. You could feel it in the air, see it in the curves of the coast, trace it in the silence between breezes. The retreat was not an ending. It was a remembrance. Life returned in slow motion, nothing hurried. Tiny mosses spread across rocks like breath returning to lungs. Insects emerged with delicate precision. Small mammals sniffed at light, blinking at a world thawing into warmth. Everything that came back did so with reverence, stepping lightly, waking slowly, honoring the silence that came before. It was not about reclaiming, it was about resuming, and the rhythm of life, once paused, found its pulse again, one heartbeat at a time. Even now, the glaciers remember. Beneath mountain shade, they whisper still, though smaller, though fewer, they persist, quiet, heavy, reflective. They hold stories in their frozen hearts, layers of time pressed tight, each flake a moment kept safe. When the wind rushes over them, they groan and sing, low and deep, like voices from the past calling softly into the now. And those who listen might still hear the hush of ages in their breath. And tonight, as you sleep, you drift through that frozen hush, wrapped in silence, carried by snowlight. The ice age is not gone. It lingers in the bones of mountains, in the memory of trees, in the slow pulse of the earth itself. You are part of that rhythm now. No need to understand, no need to remember, just drift. Let the cold cradle you. Let time melt into stillness, and let yourself fall gently, deeply, into rest. Snow fell in layers of memory. Each storm carried echoes of the one before. Flakes drifted down through pale light, turning the air into a slow dance of white. They landed without sound, resting on older snow that had forgotten the feeling of ground. With time, weight pressed them tighter, transforming softness into firmness, then into ice. What began as a cloud's quiet sigh became part of a glacier's endless body. Somewhere beneath all those layers, a single snowflake remained intact, its pattern preserved in darkness. A tiny frozen star, holding the shape of a moment no one remembered, except the ice itself. The horizon blurred into the sky, a gentle union of white and blue. There was no sharp edge where earth ended and air began, only a gradual fade, like thought slipping into dream. Creatures moved through this soft divide, silhouettes dissolving into distance. A lone reindeer could vanish with just a few steps forward, swallowed by light and snow. For those who traveled here, direction came not from what they saw, but from what they felt, the tug of wind, the slope beneath their feet, the familiar pull of migration in their blood. In a world with no clear border, guidance lived inside. Dust rode the wind between glaciers, fine grains lifted from dry plains, drifting across the sky like a faint, unseen veil. It settled on snowfields in thin, delicate layers, dimming their brightness, adding a hint of earth to all that cold. Each particle carried a journey within it, from distant mountains ground to powder, from riverbanks left bare by retreating water, from deserts forming quietly. The dust did not resist. It simply moved where the air carried it, resting briefly on ice before being buried, pressed, remembered. Even the smallest pieces of the world found a place in the Ice Age story. Loose plains stretched wide beneath pale skies. Thick blankets of wind-blown silt covered the land, soft as flour beneath careful feet. Grass rooted in this powdery soil, gripping gently, holding it in place. Herds grazed here, their hooves stirring small clouds that quickly settled back into stillness. Each grain of loess was a fragment of stone, a tiny relic of older mountains. Together, they formed a landscape that felt like a quiet breath exhaled across the earth. In spring, flowers sometimes dared to bloom atop this soft ground, brief colors against a muted world, like shy thoughts appearing in a calm mind. Cave bears slept in hidden chambers. Their breaths rose in slow, steady plumes, fogging the cool air. Curled into themselves, They surrendered to long darkness, their bodies trusting in the rhythm of seasons. Outside, snow piled against the entrance, muffling every sound. The world could change while they dreamed. Storms passing, herds migrating, rivers freezing and thawing. And still they would sleep, hearts beating with deliberate patience. In their fur, tiny bits of forest clung, leaves, soil, old sunlight remembered in scent. When they finally woke, blinking at the light, it was as if a memory had stepped gently out of time. In deep ice, bubbles of ancient air waited, tiny pockets, round and fragile, trapped between layers of frozen water. Inside them, the breath of forests long gone, the sigh of oceans, the exhale of animals who never saw a human face. Each bubble was a small, perfect time capsule holding the atmosphere of a world colder, quieter, slower. They did not break or speak or move. They simply waited, patient as stone. One day, far in the future, warm hands would hold those bubbles close and listen to their story. But for now, in the Ice Age, they slept, carrying the scent of forgotten skies. Steppe bison grazed beneath low gray clouds. Their shaggy coats held back the wind, their massive heads pushing aside snow to reach dry grass beneath. Around them, the world was open and vast, a great silent ocean of land. They moved in groups, but even together, they did not disturb the hush. Their breaths joined the air like soft steam. Their hooves left temporary patterns that the next storm would erase. They knew nothing of ages or epochs, of glaciers or geology. They knew only the taste of grass, the direction of wind, the steady comfort of the herd. And in that simplicity, they were completely at home. A single feather lay on the snow, dark against the pale. It had come loose from some bird in flight. Maybe a ptarmigan changing its coat with the season, maybe an owl drifting silently through dusk. Now it rested alone, its barbs catching tiny crystals, its spine curving gently. Wind nudged it, turned it, but did not carry it away. For a while, it became a small, quiet landmark in the endless white, a reminder that even in the coldest stillness, something once moved here. Something flew, something lived lightly enough to leave only a feather behind. In the shallows of icy seas, kelp forests swayed. Even here, where cold bit sharply and ice drifted like silent islands, life unfolded in slow motion. Long ribbons of kelp rose toward filtered light, their fronds moving with the rhythm of the tide. Fish glided between them, silver and calm. Crabs inched along the rocky bottom, tracing paths no one saw. Above, floes creaked and sighed as they bumped gently together. The surface world might have seemed frozen, but below there was a motion, not frantic, not loud, but steady, like a heartbeat hidden beneath blankets. Cave mouths glowed softly at dusk, not with bright flame, but with the low orange hush of embers. Smoke edged out in thin, lazy threads, mixing with the blue of evening. Just inside, humans sat close, wrapped in fur, their faces illuminated by flickering light. They napped stones, sewed hides with bone needles, whispered to one another in tones as quiet as the snow outside. Their tools were simple, but their minds stretched far, mapping stars, seasons, paths through the frozen world. They did not think of themselves as living in its Ice Age. They simply lived, step by step, night by night. Bone needles slid through hide with patient precision. Fingers, roughened by cold and work, guided each stitch. Sinew thread pulled edges together, forming warm garments, careful seams, gloves that held in heat. Every hole pierced in the hide was an act of care, a silent promise against the winter wind. There was rhythm in the sewing: push, pull, tug, smooth, a soft, repeating motion that soothed those who worked by firelight. Outside, the world lay in frost. Inside, a different kind of warmth was woven, one made of time, attention, and the quiet tenderness of making something that keeps others safe. Children listened to winter stories with wide, reflecting eyes, their small hands wrapped around their knees, their bodies cocooned in fur cloaks. Elders spoke slowly, their voices low, letting each word fall like a snowflake into the shared hush. The tales were not just of danger or survival, but of the land itself, of rivers that once ran free, of animals with voices, of stars that watched with kindness. Firelight painted these stories on the walls and on the listening faces. Outside, the Ice Age pressed close. Inside, imagination warmed the air, turning stone rooms into vast landscapes of memory and wonder. Sometimes, the sky was clear enough to show a faint, pale band of distant peaks on the horizon, mountains wrapped in snow and far-off light. They looked unreal, almost as if someone had drawn them onto the sky. Between here and there lay miles of frost, ridges, and valleys unknown, yet their presence comforted those who saw them. The mountains did not move quickly or demand attention. They simply existed, old and still, holding time in their slopes. To glimpse them at dawn or dusk was to be reminded that the world was bigger than any storm, and that somewhere beyond sight, other places waited in silence. Warm springs steamed quietly beneath the ice. In certain hidden hollows, hot water bubbled up from the deep, refusing to freeze. Around these small pools, the air felt softer. Moss clung to stones. Insects, spared from the harshest cold, moved cautiously at the edges. Animals sometimes found these places by instinct, drawn to the faint scent of warmth on the wind. They drank slowly, their breath mingling with the mist. For a moment, the Ice Age loosened its grip. Life gathered there, close and humble, resting in the gentle contradiction of heat wrapped inside winter. Some trees clung to cliff sides where the snow slid off just quickly enough for roots to hold, their trunks twisted in odd angles, shaped by wind and the scarcity, but they endured. Each year, they added the thinnest of rings, a narrow band of survival in their cores. Lichens painted their bark in pale greens and oranges, tiny flares of color against the gray. From a distance, these trees looked fragile, almost accidental, but up close, they felt ancient, stubborn, quietly brave. They stood where almost nothing else could, catching the faintest sunlight and turning it into the quiet work of continuing. Driftwood washed ashore on frozen beaches, bleached pale by sun and salt. Its twisted forms lay half buried in snow and sand. It had once been part of forests far away, carried by rivers, then by sea, then delivered gently to a shore of ice and wind. Humans found it there and gathered it with gratitude, knowing each piece could mean one more night of warmth, one more meal cooked, one more story told by the fire. The wood itself was silent, but its journey had been long. In its grain lay the memory of leaves, of rain, of distant warmer days. On certain nights, thin clouds formed halos around the moon. Circles of faint light ringed its cold glow, created by ice crystals high in the atmosphere. To those on the ground, wrapped in furs and hush, it looked like an eye opening in the sky. Some saw it as a sign of deeper cold to come. Others simply watched, feeling a quiet awe that needed no explanation. The halo did not linger long. It faded as the clouds shifted, leaving only the stark brightness of the moon, but the impression remained, a sense that even the sky wore its own jewelry of ice. The ground beneath tundra hummed with tiny lives. Under the moss and snow, in the thin layer between frozen earth and open sky, insects and small creatures moved. Beetles tunneled, mites crawled, microbes feasted and rested. They were unseen, unnoticed by mammoths and wolves, but they kept the soil alive, turning fallen leaves and old bones into nourishment. Even in the coldest years, when plants grew only inches tall and flowers rarely opened, these little lives continued their quiet labor. The Ice Age might have seemed like a story of giants and glaciers, but much of its resilience was written in the smallest forms of life. Sometimes, frost drew delicate patterns on stones and branches. Overnight, humidity in the air crystallized on surfaces, forming feathery ferns and sharp, lacy lines. At dawn, these frost flowers glowed faintly in first light, each one unique and fleeting. A slight touch could break them, a soft breath could melt them, and yet, each morning, new patterns appeared, as if the cold were writing its own language on the world. No one read this script then, not in words, but every eye that paused to notice it, animal or human, felt its quiet beauty. Great ground sloths wandered slowly through pockets of forest where the cold bit less deeply. Their long claws curved gently, made for pulling down branches heavy with leaves. Fur hung in thick waves from their bodies, and sometimes moss and lichen grew there too, turning them into moving fragments of forest. They were not quick or fierce. They simply moved from tree to tree, eating, resting, existing in their own careful rhythm. One day, they too would be gone, but for a long span of the Ice Age, their heavy steps and soft breaths added another, deeper note to the quiet music of the air land. In the dim light of glacier caves, blue shadows fell in layers. Meltwater had carved tunnels into the ice, smooth and cold, their walls glowing with trapped sky. For anyone stepping inside, sound changed. Footsteps softened, breaths echoed faintly. It felt like entering the inside of a frozen dream. In some places, drops of water fell slowly from icicle tips, counting time in gentle taps. These caves did not last forever. As temperatures shifted and ice moved, they collapsed, reformed, faded. But while they existed, they were like secret rooms inside the body of the glacier, hidden, fragile, and filled with luminous stillness. Snow hares turned white with the season. Their fur shifted from brown to pale, matching the world around them. They sat in hollows near shrubs, almost invisible except for the soft rise and fall of their breathing. Even their eyes, dark and shining, reflected the muted light of winter. They did not boast or roar or dominate. They survived by disappearing, by blending, by becoming one more silent curve in a landscape of curves. When danger passed, they moved again, their paws barely disturbing the surface of the snow. Each hop was a small, quiet defiance of the cold. On rare days, warm winds blew from the south, brushing across the frozen plains like a forgotten song. Snow softened, icicles thinned. The air carried a different scent, faint earth, distant pine, a memory of rain. Animals lifted their heads, noses twitching at the shift. For a brief time, their muscles relaxed, coats loosening under the gentler touch. It did not last. The cold returned, as it always did, settling back into place, but the echo of that warmth remained, tucked into bodies and soil and seeds, a reminder that change was possible, even if it arrived slowly. Crows and ravens watched from the edges of things. They perched on lonely rocks and bare branches, dark silhouettes against pale sky. Their eyes missed nothing: the movement of herds, the faint wisp of smoke, the glint of sun on ice. They flew over human camps and predator trails, their calls cutting through the quiet now and then. Scavengers, yes, but also witnesses. They saw the world as it was, from above, in broad, patient sweeps, and as they passed over the frozen land, their shadows slid across snow and stone like silent, fleeting thoughts. The moon rose low and large on winter nights, swollen by the horizon's illusion. It seemed close enough to touch, hanging just above distant ridges. Craters and plains etched its face, old scars visible even to eyes unused to detail. In that cold and open world, the moon became a companion, steady and familiar. People measured time by its phases. Animals adjusted their movement to its light. When clouds covered it, the darkness felt deeper. When it shone clear, footsteps grew softer, as if everything under its gaze moved with more care. Unseen beneath frozen rivers, fish held to slow, deliberate paths. Water, though chilled nearly to stillness, still moved. A gentle, secret current drifting from bend to bend. The fish's fins stirred just enough to keep them grounded in the flow. Some gathered in deeper pools, sharing warmth and space in quiet clusters. Their scales caught faint hints of light, filtering through ice above, turning them into moving pieces of dull silver. They did not know spring by name, but they waited for it, bodies tuned to cycles older than any individual life. In certain valleys, fog gathered and lingered, refusing to rise even under pale sunlight. It wound among bare trunks and snowdrifts, softening every edge. Sound became thick there, a snapped twig, a distant call, all absorbed by the mist. Animals moved through it like ghosts, appearing and vanishing in slow succession. To walk in such a valley was to feel held, as if wrapped in a veil of cloud. The world beyond the fog continued: glaciers, plains, mountains. But inside, time seemed to slow even further, each step measured in breaths, and the whisper of frost underfoot. Across the great ice sheets, there were places where nothing living walked for years at a time. Only wind moved there, and light, and the slow, relentless push of ice itself. These were the quietest rooms of the world, vast and empty, their only decoration the faint lines of old snowdrifts and the rare fracture where blue depths showed through. Yet even here, the planet was not empty. It was thinking in deep time, shaping coastlines and carving basins, preparing futures that no eyes yet could see. Stillness did not mean absence. It meant work happening at a scale too large for daily minds. In the darkness of long winters, eyes adjusted, pupils widened. Every flicker of light became more precious. A distant fire on a hillside, the glint of ice in moonlight, the soft glow of stars reflected in a frozen pond. All of it seemed brighter than before. Creatures that could see in this half-light thrived: owls with vast, quiet wings, foxes with narrow pupils and sharp ears, humans who learned to read shapes and shadows by embers alone. Vision became not only about seeing, but about feeling, about trusting what moved at the edges of perception. Over centuries, islands formed where ice once lay, small rises in the land, surrounded by meltwater. On them, life took early hold: mosses, then grasses, then small shrubs. Birds rested there on their journeys. Insects explored the new soil. These islands were like early thoughts of spring, appearing in the mind of the world long before the season truly changed. They were promises rather than conclusions, hints rather than transformations, but they showed that even thickest ice carried within it the shape of what would come after. Far beneath the ice, the planet's deep rocks cracked and shifted. Tectonic plates moved at the slowest imaginable pace, inches over lifetimes, miles over ages. Mountain ranges climbed grain by grain. Basins formed where once there had been high ground. The weight of glaciers pressed down, then eased as they melted, allowing the crust to lift again like a long-held breath released. No one heard these motions then. They made no sound that ears could catch, no tremor that fragile camps could feel. But the earth was changing, even in its silence, even beneath miles of ice and snow. Pollen grains drifted in tiny numbers through the air. Even in the coldest times, released from hardy plants, they rode faint breezes before settling. On snow, on ice, on soil that would not yet welcome roots. Most did not find their way to places where they could grow, and yet some did, in sheltered hollows. In cracks where warmth gathered, pollen met with possibility. These tiny fragile grains carried the promise of forests, of flowers, of fields that would one day wave under gentler skies. They floated through the ice age like miniature messages written in yellow and gold. In the end, even the longest winters are chapters, not the whole book, but inside those chapters, every breath, every footprint, every snowflake mattered. The ice age shaped the bones of the world, the sweep of coastlines, the curve of valleys, the depth of soil, and the paths of rivers. It moved slowly, patiently, like a lullaby sung over thousands of years, and all the while, life listened, adjusted, rested, endured. And as you imagine these quiet ages unfolding, the glaciers sighing, the stars steady above, the slow turning of time in frost and stone, your own breath can fall into that same rhythm. Long inhale, long exhale. Somewhere, deep in the memory of the earth, the hush of ice is still there, and you are allowed to rest inside it for as long as you need. Snow dunes rose and fell like frozen waves. Wind had sculpted them over days, weeks, years, brushing the snow into gentle ridges and flowing curves. From a distance, they looked soft, almost weightless, like the surface of a sleeping ocean. Up close, each crest held its own texture, tiny ripples where gusts had traced their passage, small drifts where flakes had gathered in quiet corners. Animals moved along their leeward sides, where the air was calmer, their bodies casting brief shadows that disappeared as clouds shifted. The dunes did not travel quickly, but they migrated all the same, inching across plains in the slow language of wind and snow. Ice crystals hung in the air as diamond dust on the coldest days when the sky was clear and the sun sat low. Tiny particles of ice floated between earth and sky, catching the light like a faint glittering fog. You could walk through it and hardly feel a thing, just a soft brightness around you, as if the air had learned how to shimmer. Each crystal was a tiny mirror reflecting a sun, snow, and breath. They drifted without hurry, settling eventually on fur, on rock, on the tip of a branch. For a brief moment, the world seemed edged in starlight, even in the middle of the day. Caribou hooves clicked softly on frozen ground. Their steps rang just enough to mark their presence, a delicate percussion under the vast silence. They moved in long lines, noses low, searching for lichen hidden beneath crusted snow. Steam rose from their bodies in faint halos, disappearing into the cold air. Calves trotted close to mothers, learning routes they could not yet remember but would someday follow without thinking. The herd was a moving memory, carrying knowledge of migration paths, safe crossings, and ancient feeding grounds. With each season, their tracks recited the same old story across the white pages of the tundra. Icicles formed along rock overhangs like frozen music. Drips of meltwater, slowed by bitter air, stretched and stiffened until they gleamed in long, slender cords of ice. Sunlight turned them clear by day. Moonlight made them silver by night. Wind sometimes coaxed a faint chime from them, a soft, brittle music that broke if the temperature changed too quickly. Birds perched above them. Small animals sheltered in the dry space behind them. And as seasons shifted, the icicles thickened, lengthened, then finally fell, shattering into a brief cascade of glassy fragments that caught the light one last time. Blizzards erased the line between earth and sky. Snow swirled in dense, swirling sheets, turning distance into a white wall only a few paces away. In that swirling, the world felt smaller, reduced to the space between heartbeats and the next step forward. Those caught in the storm learned to trust memory more than sight, the feel of a slope underfoot, the direction of wind on their faces, the remembered shelter of a grove or cave. The storm did not rage in anger. It moved with steady force, quiet and relentless. When it finally passed, the landscape was rearranged, ridges softened, hollows filled, tracks wiped clean, as if time had skipped forward in a single breath. Reindeer moss clung low to the ground, a pale branching web of life spread thin against the cold. It looked fragile, almost brittle, but it endured where taller plants could not. Hooves scraped it free, teeth pulled it up. Still it grew back slowly, creeping across rock and soil, binding the thin layer of earth in place. It fed herds in the leanest months, turning light and frost into sustenance. Underneath its delicate structure, the soil stayed just a little softer, just a little more alive. In a world of towering glaciers and vast plains, this small, stubborn growth was another quiet anchor of survival. Frost smoke rose from rivers that refused to freeze completely. On mornings when the temperature plunged, the slightly warmer water exhaled mist that drifted low over the surface. It curled and unfurled, a ghostly breath following the river's path. Animals drank cautiously along the edges, their muzzles disappearing into the fog for an instant before emerging wet and shining. From a distance, these rivers looked like sleeping dragons, thin lines of steam weaving through the frozen land. They carried warmth stolen from deeper earth, moving it slowly toward distant seas. Rock shelters offered half-formed homes against the wind. Overhangs carved by ancient water or ice extended just enough to shield a narrow strip of ground. Humans and animals alike paused there on their journeys, letting the stone take some of the sky's weight. Fires built in such places sent smoke curling along the ceiling before slipping out into the open air. Each shelter held the layered traces of many lives, soot stains, old bones, smoothed patches of earth where bodies had rested. They were not permanent houses. They were commas in the sentence of migration, brief pauses that made the long journey readable. Over time, ice scratched long lines into bedrock, grooves running parallel across hillsides and valley floors. Each mark was a memory of stone pressed against stone, carried by glaciers, grinding slowly along. When the ice was gone, the lines remained, a subtle script etched into the land. Fingers could trace them centuries later, feeling the direction in which the glacier once flowed. Animals walked over them without noticing. Grass and moss softened their edges. But beneath the green and the soil, the marks persisted, the quiet handwriting of the Ice Age, carved deep and never entirely erased. Some birds stayed through the coldest seasons, practicing a different kind of migration, one of altitude and shelter rather than distance. They moved from valley to valley, from forest pocket to cliffside hollow, following food and the shifting protection of land. Their calls were sparse, careful, as if sound itself cost energy. Yet sometimes, at dawn or dusk, a single song slipped into the frozen air, a brief clear note that seemed almost impossible in that stillness. It was not a declaration of territory. It was more like a reminder. Life is still here, listening. Snow buntings danced at the edges of storms. These small birds, pale and quick, flitted low over the ground, seeming to merge with the snow and then separate from it again. They fed on seeds hidden under crusts of ice, chipping away with persistent beaks. In flight, dark wing markings flashed for an instant, then vanished back into white. Their lives were stitched into the margins of cold and wind, their resilience wrapped in feathers and motion. Where larger creatures struggled, they found ways to thrive by staying light, staying small, staying in motion. The shoreline ice groaned with the tide as ocean levels rose and fell. The frozen crust at the water's edge shifted, cracked, and settled again. Sometimes a long, low sound carried across the still air, a drawn-out creak, like an old door opening very slowly. Seals rested on the floes, their sleek bodies curved against the cold, listening without alarm. They had grown up with these noises. They knew the language of flexing ice, the subtle difference between harmless movement and dangerous break. Their pups learned it too, almost by osmosis, absorbing safety and instinct from the rhythm of sound and silence. Foxes trotted between shadows, their coats thick and pale, their paws wide enough to press gently atop the snow. They paused often, ears swiveling, noses lifting to catch scents buried under drifts. Their lives were stories written in patience, a listening here, a careful step there, a sudden leap when the moment was right. In the fur along their backs, frost sometimes gathered, turning them for a while into moving sculptures of ice and breath. They slipped between the domains of cave and field, forest pocket and open tundra, ambassadors of quiet adaptability. On sunlit days, the snow surface developed a faint crust, a thin, shining skin that could hold weight for a heartbeat before breaking. Animals learned the feel of it, the sound it made underfoot, a soft crack, a crunch, a sigh. Sometimes the crust held long enough to ease the journey, supporting bodies that would otherwise sink deep. Other times, it fractured with each step, turning progress into an exercise in effort and trust. Yet with each new cycle of melting and freezing, the snow reformed itself, building new layers, new textures, new tests. The air itself seemed to carry memory. It held the scent of distant resin, of salt from far-off seas, of cold rock and old leaves and fur. Winds crossing the ice sheets arrived in other places stripped of warmth but full of story. They moved over camps and herds, through forests and across plains, brushing against skin and branch and stone. In a way, to breathe in that world was to inhale 1,000 distant moments, the breath of volcanoes and glaciers, of ancient fires and frozen seas. Even exhalations joined this subtle exchange, adding new notes to the invisible chorus. Under the snow, tunnels formed where small bodies passed again and again. Voles and mice carved paths through the insulated world, safe from many predators and the sharpest winds. Their tracks, invisible from above, created a lace of passageways between roots, seeds, stored food, and hidden nests. If the snow melted suddenly, this delicate architecture vanished, but as long as the winter held, these creatures lived in their own secret underworld, a softer, quieter version of the frozen land, where fur brushed against crystal and sound was no more than a rustle in the dark. Some cliffs held cascades of ice, where waterfalls once flowed freely. The water had not stopped, it had only slowed, trapped in place by cold, inching forward inside its own frozen cage. The surface gleamed in shades of white and blue, ripples of motion caught in mid-fall. In spring, the thaw would hollow channels through the solid curtain, sending rivulets whispering down the rock face. But through winter, these icy veils remained still, an echo of movement made sculpture by the air itself. Birds sometimes landed nearby, as if perching beside a sleeping river. On clear nights after fresh snow, the sky felt almost too large. Stars scattered across the darkness in numbers that modern eyes rarely know, filling every gap between horizon and zenith. Constellations arched overhead, like ancient drawings pinned to a vast ceiling. The Milky Way spilled its pale band from one edge of the world to the other, a frozen river to mirror the ones below. To look up in that stillness was to feel both small and held at once, a single breath under an endless dome, cradled by patterns that had watched countless winters come and go. As the ages moved on, layers of ice thickened over stories no one remembered telling. Footprints, fallen branches, the faint depressions of old campsites, all were covered, compressed, gradually woven into the deeper strata of the frozen world. The Ice Age became not just a time, but a library of moments, each one pressed between seasons like a dried leaf in a book. The pages closed slowly, but not forever. Someday, warmth would open them again, revealing what had rested there in silence. For now, they lay hidden, safe inside the fold of frost and time. Far to the south, beyond the main grip of the glaciers, forests whispered their own quiet reply. Trees grew taller there, leaves broader, rivers less bound by ice. Yet even in those gentler regions, the breath of the Ice Age could be felt, in colder winds, in shifting rainfall, in species moving slowly toward warmth. Birds carried seeds north and south, redistributing life like careful scribes, changing the margins of a text. The whole planet adjusted from pole to equator, every region responding in slow, subtle ways to the great sleeping cold. When you imagine all of this, the deep ice and the drifting dust, the long-haired giants and the tiny lives beneath the snow, the quiet humans watching skies that seem to stretch forever, you're stepping into a kind of shared memory, a place where time lifted its foot from the accelerator and let everything move in a softer gear. The Ice Age is long gone, and yet, in the shape of valleys, in the curve of coastlines, in the whispers held by old stones and ancient ice, it is still here. And as you listen to it, as you drift alongside it in your thoughts, you are allowed to match its pace, so you breathe a little slower. You let your own thoughts lengthen like shadows in the low winter sun. The world outside your room shrinks to a quiet pool, and within that pool, whole ages unfold gently, without rush. Glaciers advance, then rest. Herds move, then sleep. Fires crackle softly in the background of human history. Small circles of warmth in oceans of frost, and you, safe where you are, float between those images like a drifting snowflake, weightless, unhurried, ready to settle wherever rest feels deepest. Glacial winds sculpted the air into ribbons. They weren't violent or sharp, just persistent currents that carried the taste of distant mountains and the faint memory of storms hundreds of miles away. These winds moved across valleys with long, even strokes, brushing the tops of frozen grasses and stirring loose snow into soft spirals. Animals braced their bodies into them, fur rippling in slow waves. Humans learned to read them. The slight shift that meant colder days ahead, the gentle warmth that hinted at a far-off thaw. The wind was a teacher, speaking in a language of temperature and texture. Ancient peat bogs slept beneath the frost, layers of decayed plants, trapped in damp stillness, formed pillows of earth that held the memory of warmer times. In summer, they released the scent of moss and soil, but in winter, they hid under glassy sheets of ice. Water moved slowly through them, carrying bits of old life deeper into the ground. Seeds, pollen, fragments of leaves, all tucked away, preserved in the cold. For thousands of years, these bogs gathered the world's whispers. They had no need for speed. They grew and sank and waited, the way old thoughts rest at the back of the mind until the right moment returns. In certain valleys, shadows never saw the sun. Steep cliffs blocked the low winter light, and the cold pooled there like a deep, quiet lake. Snow piled in layers, untouched by thaw. Icicles hung for months. The ground froze so deeply that even hardy plants surrendered, curling into themselves. Yet animals passed through these places carefully, aware of their stillness. The silence wasn't threatening. It was simply complete. A pocket of pure winter, preserved in the shape of the land. Even when the world around it warmed, these valleys remained like small archives of frost. Windswept ridges revealed stones polished to a gentle shine. Glaciers had dragged them here, smoothing their surfaces with unhurried hands of pressure and time. Now they lay arranged like quiet constellations across the hills, dark granite, pale limestone, speckled basalt. Some bore scratches carved by ice. Ages ago, others were new to the surface, pushed upward by the slow churn of earth beneath. Humans sometimes gathered them in circles around fires or used them to weigh down hides. The stones offered no instructions, but their presence brought a sense of continuity, that even as snow came and went, the land beneath remained steady. Across frozen coasts, tide cracks spidered through sea ice. Thin lines spread outward from points of pressure, branching into intricate networks that looked almost like delicate frost maps. Each crack carried a quiet sound, a soft pop, a gentle snap as the ocean below shifted and pressed. Seals and polar foxes listened for these whispers. They knew when the ice was safe and when it was beginning to drift. The cracks told stories, not of danger, but of change. Nothing in the Ice Age stayed perfectly still. Even the frozen ocean breathed. Woolly musk oxen moved in tight layered circles during storms. Their shaggy coats, long as curtains, trapped warmth close to their bodies. Adults stood along the outer ring, horns forward, sheltering calves at the center. Snow piled on their backs like blankets, softening their shapes into rounded mounds of quiet endurance. They barely moved, barely blinked, letting the storm pass over them. When the wind finally eased, they shook off the weight, revealing dark eyes that gleamed with ancient calm. This was how they had survived, not by fleeing, but by holding steady in the heart of winter's breath. A thin layer of rime frost formed on exposed surfaces, where warm breath met cold air, or where a bit of sunlight warmed the edge of a branch. Before dusk, moisture crystallized into feathery structures. They grew outward in tiny spikes and delicate fans, turning mundane things twigs, stones, even animal fur, into sculptures. To touch them was to destroy them, but to look was enough. A brief moment of noticing beauty born from temperature and stillness. Rime frost lived only until the next shift in air, then melted quietly back into the world without complaint. Inside deep caves, water dripped with unwavering rhythm. Each drop fell from stalactite to stone with a soft, deliberate tap, marking time slower than any heartbeat. These caves had existed before the cold and would remain long after, but during the Ice Age, they became sanctuaries of constant temperature. Humans stored food there, animals slept there, the echoes of every movement lingered in the cool dark, and the dripping, steady, patient, counted the years in small increments, carving pillars of calcite so slowly that a lifetime hardly saw them change. Hillsides were blanketed in snow, thick enough to muffle all sound. Even footsteps vanished into softness. A single branch, breaking under weight, could echo like a gentle snap of fabric. In these quiet places, sound felt sacred. A snapped twig meant life. A distant crack meant shifting ice. The soft thud of falling snow meant the world was adjusting itself. Those walking through these hills listened more deeply than they spoke, trusting their senses in a place that hid everything except presence. Frozen waterfalls hung like curtains of glass. Their surfaces glimmered with trapped air, old leaves, and the memory of flowing water. Sometimes you could hear faint movement beneath the ice, a slow trickle still trying to pass. Muted but persistent, birds perched on the edges. Wolves paused to drink from sheltered pockets where the ice thinned. The falls did not roar or rush. They shimmered with stillness, suspended in a moment that felt both eternal and temporary. Sometimes the snow reflected the sky so perfectly that the world turned into one continuous field of pale light. Horizon lines vanished. Depth and height traded places. Travelers moved carefully, their eyes squinting against the quiet glare. This phenomenon, a whiteout without storm, made even familiar paths feel dreamlike. But as clouds shifted or shadows stretched, the world slowly reassembled itself, like a memory coming back into focus. On calm evenings, smoke from fires rose in long, straight columns. There was no wind to bend it, no gust to scatter it into the trees. It ascended in steady lines, dissolving slowly into the open air. To those watching from the shelter of a cave or hide tent, this smoke looked like a story returning to the sky, a soft thread connecting warmth to the cold, life to landscape. It signaled safety. Where smoke rose, there was warmth, food, breath. In the southern steppes, herds of wild horses galloped over frosty grasses. Their manes streamed like banners behind them, catching bits of morning light. Their hooves struck earth with muted thuds, sending small puffs of ice crystals into the air. Predators watched from ridgelines, eyes steady, bodies still. The chase was a dance as old as time, swift, silent, respectful. Sometimes the horses outran danger, sometimes danger caught up. Both outcomes belonged to the rhythm of the world. Ancient dunes, left from times before the cold fully claimed the land, lay partially buried under snow. Their shapes made the landscape resemble a sleeping desert draped in white. Wind carved the edges of these dunes, smoothing them into gentle slopes. Underneath, the sand remained warm in color, waiting. When the Ice Age ended, these dunes would emerge again, golden against green. But for now, the snow held them quietly, softening every curve. On frozen lakes, the ice sang. As temperatures shifted, warmer at midday, colder at dusk, the ice expanded and contracted, sending haunting tones across its surface, deep booms, high crystalline pings, long, whale-like moans that echoed through the dark. To the people who lived nearby, these sounds were familiar companions, not warnings, conversations. The lake was speaking, adjusting itself within the cold. Even animals paused at the sound, listening with stillness engraved into their bones. Beneath layers of frost, lichen painted stone, in subtle colors, mossy greens, rusty oranges, soft blues, these small, ancient organisms endured where even grasses could not. They grew millimeter by millimeter, so slowly that their progress was invisible. Yet they never gave up their hold. They were the painters of the Ice Age, adding quiet beauty to cliffs and boulders, writing in hues that lasted lifetimes. Across the tundra, migrating birds traced invisible highways in the sky. Some traveled astonishing distances, from frozen coasts to southern warmth, guided by instincts shaped long before human memory. When they returned, they brought stories in their feathers, dust from warmer deserts, scents from distant forests. Their calls echoed across the cold, brief but bright, small reminders that the world extended far beyond the frozen horizon. As seasons turned, thin films of hoarfrost grew on the edges of leaves and twigs. Each crystal extended outward like a fragile feather or a shard of spun glass. In the morning light, entire forests glittered as if dusted with stars. A breeze could erase those stars instantly, sending them swirling into the air in a final shimmer. But before they vanished, the world looked touched by something otherworldly, a moment of winter magic that needed no audience to exist. Even the deepest cold could not still volcanic heat completely. In rare places, lava tubes under snow carried faint warmth toward the surface. The snow above them sank slightly, forming shallow hollows that puzzled wandering animals. Warmth rose from cracks in unexpected places, melting tiny halos into the ice. A fox might curl into such a hollow for a night's rest, finding comfort where fire and frost met in hidden balance. In the stillness of long nights, stars seemed sharper than ever. Their light reached Earth with no interference, no haze, no smoke, no glare. Constellations looked close enough to touch. The Milky Way poured its river of pale light from horizon to horizon. Humans traced its patterns with quiet reverence, using them to predict seasons, migrations, the moods of the weather. Some saw animals in the stars, others saw ancestors, others saw only light, but all saw meaning. Bits of meteorite fell into snowdrifts every few years, tiny fragments from the sky that cooled instantly on contact with the frozen ground. Humans sometimes found them later, their dark metal contrasting sharply with bright snow. Some kept them as tools, some as symbols. In a world shaped by ice, the idea that a piece of the heavens could fall quietly into one's path carried a weight that didn't need words. On the edges of old forests, fallen trees created small shelters for animals. Snow piled atop the trunks, creating curved roofs under which foxes, martens, and rabbits slept. Their breaths warmed the tiny chambers, melting frost and making miniature caves of comfort. These simple structures, a tree fallen in the right way, at the right angle, became homes that lasted generations. Even when everything else shifted, these shelters remained constant. And as you drift through these scenes, winds over dunes, ice singing on lakes, animals threading the quiet edges of survival, your mind softens into the same slow rhythm. The Ice Age stretches not as a single event, but as a landscape of patience where every breath resounds against the cold in gentle echoes. Let yourself rest in that long, quiet span. Let time thicken around you like slow falling snow, and let your thoughts settle unhurried as the world once did, beneath pale skies, beneath drifting frost, beneath ages of soft and sacred stillness.